At 2:14 inches the morning billionaire Jonathan Reed saw something in his mansion that made his blood turn cold. The marble hallway was silent, washed in soft gold light. The air smelled like lemon polish and expensive flowers. Jonathan had just returned from another late-night deal, the kind of deal that made powerful men afraid to look him in the eye. Then he stopped. A woman in a gray cleaning uniform stood on a small step stool reaching for the top shelf of his built-in bookcase. She was heavily pregnant. Her breathing was slow and strained. One hand pressed against her lower back, the other held a spray bottle. She should not have been there. Not at this hour. Not like this. Jonathan was about to walk past when her sleeve slipped down. 5 bruises circled her wrist. Finger marks. Purple at the center. Yellow at the edges. Someone had grabbed her hard and held on. His jaw tightened. Then the woman turned slightly and the hallway light touched her face. A small pale scar sat above her left eyebrow. Jonathan froze. He knew that scar. He had seen it bleed years ago on a broken sidewalk when a little girl fell from a fence while chasing his kite. Her name had been Emily Harper. His childhood best friend. The girl he thought he had lost forever. And now, she was standing in his mansion, pregnant, bruised, and cleaning his floors in the middle of the night. But the worst part was this. She looked at him with fear in her eyes. She had no idea who he was. Jonathan Reed had seen men lie under oath. He had watched CEOs smile while destroying thousands of lives. He had sat across from criminals in tailored suits and never once looked away. But the bruises on Emily Harper's wrist hit him harder than any threat ever had. They were not random marks. They were not from a fall. They were shaped like a hand. 5 fingers pressed into her skin with enough force to leave purple stains beneath the surface. The center of each bruise was dark, almost black. The edges had begun to fade into a sick yellow, the kind of color that told him the damage was days old. Maybe a week. Someone had grabbed her. Someone had held on. And Emily had kept working anyway. Jonathan stood frozen in the hallway, his eyes locked on her wrist before he forced himself to look away. He knew better than to stare. A woman with bruises like that noticed everything. Every glance, every movement, every sound behind her. She had already seen too much danger. He could tell by the way her body reacted before her mind did. Her hand flew to her stomach. Her shoulders pulled inward. Her eyes moved quickly to the door, then to the service elevator, then back to him. She was measuring distance. Planning escape. From him? That realization cut deeper than he expected. Sorry, she said, stepping down from the stool too fast. Her foot slipped slightly on the polished floor. Jonathan almost reached out, but he stopped himself. One sudden move and she might break apart right there in front of him. I didn't mean to disturb you, she whispered. I'll come back later. Her voice was small, careful, trained by fear. Jonathan had heard that voice before. Not from her. From his mother years ago, when she told neighbors everything was fine while hiding bruises under long sleeves. His chest tightened. Wait, he said. The word came out too sharp. Emily froze. Her fingers curled protectively over her belly, her breathing changed. Shallow, quiet. Controlled. Jonathan lowered his voice. You don't have to leave, he said. I was just passing through. She nodded once, but nothing in her relaxed. Not her face. Not her hands. Not the way she kept her injured wrist tucked close to her body, like even the air touching it hurt. The mansion around them felt suddenly enormous. The long hallway. The marble floors. The paintings worth more than most homes. The silence pressing down from every corner. And in the middle of all that wealth stood Emily Harper, pregnant and exhausted, cleaning shelves at 2 a.m, as if disappearing into work was the only way she knew how to survive. Jonathan wanted to say her name. He wanted to tell her he remembered the fence, the kite, the blood on her cheek, the brave little girl who told him not to cry even while she was the one bleeding. But he could not. Not yet. Because the woman standing in front of him was not only tired. She was terrified. And whoever had left those marks on her wrist was still somewhere in her life. Maybe close. Maybe waiting. Maybe watching. So Jonathan did the only thing he could do in that moment. He stepped back. Gave her space. Let her breathe. Emily lowered her eyes and moved toward the service elevator, one hand on her belly, the other hidden beneath her sleeve. The brass doors opened. She stepped inside. Just before they closed, Jonathan saw her wrist again. 5 bruises. 5 warnings. And as the elevator swallowed her from sight, one thought settled in his mind like a loaded gun. Someone had hurt Emily Harper. And Jonathan Reed was going to find out who. The elevator doors closed. And Jonathan Reed stayed there, staring at his own reflection in the polished brass. For a moment he saw the man the world knew. The billionaire? The dealmaker. The man who could buy buildings, crush companies, and make a room go silent just by walking in. But then his eyes shifted. And all he could see was that scar. Small, pale, almost hidden above Emily Harper's left eyebrow. Half an inch, maybe less. Anyone else would have missed it. Anyone else would have seen only a tired pregnant housekeeper in a gray uniform carrying bruises she was trying desperately to hide. But Jonathan knew that scar. He had never forgotten it. The hallway around him blurred, and suddenly he was not standing inside a mansion anymore. He was 10 years old again, running down a cracked sidewalk on Hawthorne Street with a kite string burning through his fingers. The sky had been bright blue that day. Too blue. The kind of sky children remember because nothing terrible is supposed to happen under it. Emily had been behind him laughing. "Hold it higher, John." "I am holding it higher." The kite had dipped over a chain-link fence near the old grocery lot. Jonathan had panicked, certain it was gone forever. But Emily had climbed before he could stop her. She was always like that. Braver than him. Faster than him. Stubborn in a way that made adults sigh and children follow. Her sneaker slipped on the top rail. The fence shook. Then she fell. Jonathan still remembered the sound. Not loud. Just a small, terrible thud. She hit the sidewalk face first. Blood ran down from her eyebrow over her cheek and into her eye. Jonathan had frozen, too scared to move, too scared to breathe. Emily had sat up first. She wiped the blood away with the back of her hand, looked at him and said, "Don't cry, I'm fine." But she had not been fine. She had needed stitches. And for weeks after that, Jonathan had walked her to school carrying her books, standing between her and anyone who dared to laugh. That scar had become part of his memory of her. A tiny white mark from the day he learned that Emily could bleed and still try to comfort him. Now, years later, that same scar had found him in the middle of the night. Not in a memory. Not in a dream. In his own house. On the face of a woman who looked at him like he might hurt her. Jonathan stepped back from the elevator as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Emily Harper. His Emily. The girl who used to split peanut butter sandwiches with him when his mother forgot to pack lunch. The girl who held his hand outside the hospital the night he thought his whole world was ending. The girl who disappeared from Hawthorne Street without goodbye, without a note, without a trace. He had searched for her once. Quietly at first. Then obsessively. Old neighbors. School records. Private investigators. Dead ends. And now she had returned in the worst possible way. Pregnant, bruised, exhausted. Cleaning his shelves at 2 in the morning. Jonathan turned toward his study, but his legs felt heavy. Because the scar had given him the truth. And the truth was unbearable. Emily Harper had not vanished from his life. She had survived something. And whatever it was, it had followed her all the way to his door. Jonathan closed the study door behind him, but the past had already followed him inside. He did not turn on the lights. He sat in the dark, still wearing his tailored suit, still smelling faintly of rain and city air, while the image of Emily Harper on that step stool burned behind his eyes. Pregnant. Bruised. Afraid. And that scar. That tiny scar above her eyebrow had pulled open a door he had spent years nailing shut. Back then there had been no mansion, no marble floors, no private drivers waiting outside, no last name that made bankers answer on the first ring. There had only been Hawthorne Street. A narrow block with cracked sidewalks, rusted fences, and kids who learned early that life did not hand out second chances. Jonathan had been just a skinny boy with scraped knees and too much anger in his chest. Emily had been the girl next door, who wore hand-me-down sweaters, ran faster than the boys, and laughed like the whole world was not trying to break her. She never let him feel alone. When other kids mocked his worn-out shoes, Emily stood beside him like a little soldier. When his mother got sick and the apartment went quiet for days, Emily brought him half a sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. When he acted tough, she saw through it. "You don't have to pretend with me," she once told him. He had never forgotten that. And then came the kite. It had been a cheap red kite from a corner store, the first thing Jonathan had bought with coins he saved for weeks. The wind had caught it wrong and dragged it over the chain-link fence near the abandoned lot. Jonathan remembered yelling. He remembered feeling stupid for caring so much about a toy. Emily did not laugh. She just said, "I'll get it." Before he could stop her, she climbed. Her fingers gripped the metal links. Her sneakers searched for a place to hold. The fence bent under her weight, shaking like it wanted to throw her off. "Emily, come down," he shouted. But she reached higher. For him. Then her foot slipped. The sound of her hitting the sidewalk still lived somewhere deep inside him. Jonathan had run to her, terrified, his throat locked around her name. Blood slid from the cut above her eyebrow down her cheek into her eye. He had started crying before she did. And Emily, bleeding and shaking, had wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Don't cry, John," she whispered. "I'm fine." She was always saying that. Even when she was not fine. The next day she came to school with stitches and a small bandage over her eyebrow. Jonathan walked beside her the whole way, carrying her books like it was the most important job in the world. From that day on, he watched out for her. He scared off kids who teased her clothes. He saved the bigger half of his lunch. He stood between her and every cruel thing he could see. But one night, Emily was gone, her apartment emptied, her family vanished. No goodbye. No explanation. Jonathan spent years wondering what had happened to the girl who once bled for his kite. Now he knew only one thing. Life had hurt her again. And this time he was not a powerless boy on a broken sidewalk. This time he would not just stand there crying. For the first time in years, Jonathan Reed was afraid to say his own name. Not the name printed on towers. Not the name whispered in boardrooms. The name Emily Harper would have known. Back on Hawthorne Street he had been Johnny Hale, a thin, restless boy with bruised knuckles, second-hand jeans, and a mother who worked until her hands cracked. He had not been Jonathan Reed then. He had not owned anything. He had not frightened anyone. He had not learned how to turn his pain into power. Emily had known that boy. But the woman in the hallway had looked at him like he was a stranger. No. Worse than a stranger. A threat. The memory came back in sharp pieces. The step stool. The gray uniform. The way she stepped down too fast when he spoke. The way her hand flew to her belly before she answered him. She had studied his face for one breath. Maybe two. Long enough for Jonathan to hope. Long enough for him to believe that some small part of her might still remember him. But there had been nothing. No spark. No recognition. Only fear. And how could he blame her? The boy from Hawthorne Street was buried deep. His face had hardened. His shoulders had widened. His jaw carried a beard now. His eyes no longer belonged to a child who flew kites on broken sidewalks. They belonged to a man who had signed contracts at midnight, fired executives before sunrise, and walked through rooms where everyone else lowered their voices. He had built a new life brick by brick. A new name. A new fortune. A new skin. And somewhere along the way, Johnny Hale disappeared. Emily Harper had not disappeared from his memory. But he had disappeared from hers. Jonathan stood from the chair and crossed the dark study. The glass wall looked out over the sleeping city. Far below, headlights moved like small, distant sparks. People were going home. People were waking up. Somewhere inside this enormous house, Emily was still working, still carrying that child, still hiding a wounded wrist beneath her sleeve. He pressed one hand against the cold glass. "What happened to you?" he whispered. But the question turned back on him. What happened to you? He saw himself as she must have seen him. A tall man in an expensive suit. Silent. Powerful. Standing in a dark hallway at 2 a.m. The owner of the house. The kind of man a frightened woman would never trust. He wanted to run after her. To stop the elevator. To say, "Emily, it's me. It's Johnny. I remember the kite. I remember the fence. I remember you telling me not to cry." But he knew better. A name would not erase years. A memory would not heal bruises. And a rich man's concern could look too much like control. So Jonathan stayed where he was. He let the silence punish him. Because the truth was simple and brutal. The girl who once knew him better than anyone in the world had stood 3 feet away from him. And she had not known him at all. Somewhere in the mansion, a service elevator hummed. Jonathan turned toward the sound. He did not know how to bring Emily Harper back into his life. But he knew one thing. He would not scare her away again. Jonathan did not sleep that night. He stood in the study until the city lights began to fade behind the windows, until the black sky turned a dull blue, until the mansion grew quiet in a different way. Not peaceful. Waiting. At 3:58 inches the morning, he picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for 1 second. He knew what this meant. Once he asked the question, he could not pretend he had only seen a tired employee in his hallway. He would know. And once he knew, he would have to act. "Pull every file on the overnight housekeeping staff," Jonathan said when his head of security answered. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Employment records? Addresses? References? Previous jobs? I want everything on my desk before sunrise." There was a pause. "Sir, it's almost 4 a.m. Jonathan looked toward the hallway door as if he could still see Emily standing there with her sleeve pulled down over those bruises. "Then you have 3 hours. He ended the call. For the next 2 hours, he moved through the mansion like a ghost. He passed rooms filled with art, silver glass, and silence, things he had spent years collecting. Things that were supposed to prove he had won. But none of it mattered now. Not the house. Not the money. Not the empire. Somewhere under his roof, Emily Harper was working a job that kept her invisible. Cleaning after midnight, avoiding questions. Avoiding people. Avoiding the light. By 6:47, a thick folder waited on his desk. Jonathan stared at it before opening it as if the paper itself might bleed. The first page carried her new employee photo. Emily Harper. Age 29. Hired 8 months ago. Overnight housekeeping. No emergency contact. No listed home address beyond a post office box in a town he barely recognized. He turned the page slowly. Previous employment: housekeeping at a hotel outside Newark. A cleaning service, a roadside diner where she had worked for 3 years. No references. No personal notes except one line written by the hiring manager in the margin. Quiet, reliable, keeps to herself. Jonathan read it once. Then again. Keeps to herself. Those words sounded harmless to anyone else. To Jonathan they sounded like survival. He kept reading. The interview notes were brief, almost careless. She had arrived early. Spoke softly. Asked if overnight work required much interaction with guests. Asked if staff housing was available. Asked if employee schedules were ever shared with outsiders. Then one line made Jonathan's hand tighten around the page. Seems scared of something. He leaned back in the chair. The room seemed colder. Emily had not come to his mansion looking for opportunity. She had come looking for a place to disappear. A place where no one asked too many questions. A place where she could work while the world slept. A place where a pregnant woman with bruises could hide in plain sight. Jonathan closed the folder, but only for a moment. His hands were steady now. Not because he was calm. Because the decision had already been made. Emily Harper had spent years running from something, and Jonathan Reed was done letting her run alone. Jonathan opened the folder again. This time he did not read like a man checking an employee record. He read like a man standing at the edge of a crime scene. On the next page the name changed. Emily Harper had not always been Emily Harper. 6 years earlier she had signed a marriage certificate in Atlantic City under another last name. Emily Harper Bennett. Her husband's name was Ryan Bennett. Jonathan stared at the page until the letters seemed to move. Ryan Bennett. There was no photograph attached to the certificate, only a date, 2 signatures, and the cold official language of public records. But even that paper felt dirty in his hands. He turned the page. A police report. 3 years old. Domestic disturbance. Neighbors heard screaming from an apartment kitchen. Officers arrived to find Emily on the floor, one cheek bruised, her left wrist swollen. She told them she had slipped. No charges were filed. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He turned another page. Another report. 2 years old. Emergency room admission. Fractured rib, black eye, a cut on her scalp deep enough to need stitches. Emily told the doctors she had been mugged. The hospital called police anyway. By the time officers arrived she had already checked herself out. Jonathan stopped reading for a moment. His fingers pressed into the edge of the desk so hard the paper bent beneath them. He could see it too clearly. Emily alone in a hospital room, one hand over her stomach, maybe before the pregnancy, maybe after years of being taught that help always came with a price. Nurses asking questions, police waiting outside. Her choosing the door instead of the truth because truth had never protected her before. He forced himself to continue. There was a temporary order of protection filed months ago. Then dropped. No explanation. No divorce. No legal separation. No missing person report after she disappeared. Ryan Bennett had not gone looking for his pregnant wife. Or maybe he had. Maybe he already knew exactly where she was. That thought moved through Jonathan like ice water. He pushed the chair back and stood. For years people had called him ruthless. Cold. Dangerous. They said he could destroy a man without raising his voice. They were not entirely wrong. But this anger was different. This was not business. This was not pride. This was the memory of his mother sitting at the kitchen table with makeup over her bruises telling him she had bumped into a cabinet. This was a little boy pretending not to hear shouting through a bedroom wall. This was every helpless night he had survived before he learned how to become feared. And now Emily had lived the same nightmare. The girl who once wiped blood from her eye and told him not to cry had spent years telling police, doctors, and strangers that she was fine. She was not fine. She had never been fine. Jonathan looked at the final page again. Quiet. Reliable. Keeps to herself. No emergency contact. No address. Pregnant. Scared of something. No. Scared of someone. He closed the folder slowly. The study was silent, but inside him something had already shifted. The man who built empires would have made a phone call. The boy from Hawthorne Street would have run into danger without thinking. Jonathan Reed was both now, and Ryan Bennett had no idea what was coming. Jonathan stood in the study with the closed folder beneath his hand. But the folder was not the thing crushing him. Memory was. For years he had told himself that Emily Harper vanished because life was cruel. Because families moved. Because poor people disappeared from neighborhoods all the time, leaving behind empty apartments, unpaid bills, and questions nobody had the time to answer. That was the story he had accepted. Because it was easier than the truth. He had lost her. And he had stopped looking too soon. The thought hit him so hard he had to sit down. Back on Hawthorne Street, Emily had been the one person who never made him feel ashamed of having nothing. She had seen him hungry and split her lunch without making him ask. She had seen him scared and held his hand like fear was nothing to hide. She had seen the worst parts of his childhood and stayed anyway. Then one night she was gone. He remembered standing outside her apartment door the next morning. The door was half open. The rooms were empty. A bent curtain rod hung over the window. Dust floated in a strip of sunlight. Her family's old couch was gone. The little blue bike she never let anyone touch was gone. Everything was gone. Except a red kite tail caught in the fence behind the building. Jonathan had waited for weeks. Then months. He asked neighbors. He checked the school office. He walked past that apartment every day until another family moved in and painted over the marks on the wall where Emily had measured her height. But he was a child. A powerless boy with empty pockets. Later, when he became powerful, he searched again. Quietly. Privately. He paid people to find her. They brought him nothing but dead ends and old addresses that led nowhere. Eventually, he buried the ache under work. Under money. Under anger. Under a new name. But now Emily had been under his roof for 8 months. 8 months. Cleaning his floors, passing through service halls. Eating staff meals, carrying a child. Hiding bruises beneath her sleeves. And he had not known. Jonathan pressed his fists against his mouth and closed his eyes. The guilt came in waves, sharp and merciless. How many nights had she walked these halls while he slept upstairs? How many times had she stood only a few rooms away, afraid, exhausted, alone? How many chances had he had to see her before that bruise forced him to look? A sound escaped him, low and broken. Not a sob. Not quite. Something heavier. He thought of the little girl on the sidewalk, blood running into her eye telling him not to cry. He thought of the woman in the hallway, hand over her belly, looking at him like Danger had learned to wear expensive suits. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark room. No one answered. But the apology stayed there, hanging between the boy he had been and the man he had become. Then Jonathan lifted his head. The guilt was still there. It would always be there. But guilt alone would not protect Emily. Regret would not erase Ryan Bennett. Memories would not make her safe. He reached for the folder again, opened it, and stared at her employee photo. Emily Harper was not a ghost from his past anymore. She was here, alive, terrified, and still fighting. Jonathan touched the edge of the photograph with one finger as carefully as if the paper could feel pain. "I failed you once," he said. His voice was quiet, but this time it did not shake. "I won't fail you again." That night Jonathan found her in the library. Not by accident. He had been waiting in the leather chair near the fireplace, the room lit only by a low amber glow and the faint blue shadow of the city beyond the windows. A book lay open on his lap, but he had not read a single word. At 2:07 Emily Harper walked in with her cleaning caddy. The moment she saw him, her step broke. Just once? Then she forced herself forward. She crossed to the shelves and began wiping the polished wood like nothing had changed. Like he had not seen the bruises. Like he had not opened the folder. Like he had not spent the whole day carrying her pain inside his chest. Jonathan let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. Then he said softly, "You don't have to pretend you don't know me." Her hand stopped moving. The cloth stayed pressed against the shelf. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Emily?" Her shoulders tightened. Jonathan stood slowly, careful not to startle her. "I know it's you. I knew the second I saw the scar. The way you stand. The way you tuck your chin when you're trying not to cry." She turned around. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wet but angry too. "You had no right to look into my life. I saw bruises on your wrist. That doesn't give you the right. It does when someone is hurting you in my house." She let out a bitter little laugh. "Your house. Right. I forgot. You're Jonathan Reed now. The billionaire. The man in magazines. We don't belong in the same world anymore. We grew up on the same street. That was a long time ago. Not long enough for me to forget you." The words hit her harder than he expected. Her mouth trembled. For a moment she looked like the girl from Hawthorne Street again. The girl with wild hair, scraped knees, and blood running from a cut above her eye. Then she looked away. "What do you want from me, Jonathan?" "The truth." She pressed one hand to her belly. Her other hand curled into her sleeve, hiding the bruises again. "The truth," she whispered. "My father lost everything. Gambling. Debt. Men came looking for him. My mother cried every night. One day we packed whatever fit in the car and left before sunrise. No goodbye. No address. No way back." Jonathan did not move. Emily's voice grew thinner. "We ended up in shelters. Then cheap rooms. My mother got sick. I dropped out of school. I worked wherever they would take me. Diners. Hotels, cleaning jobs, 3 jobs at once sometimes. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I used to think about you. About what my life might have been if I had stayed. Then why didn't you try to find me? Because I was ashamed. The words fell between them like glass. Ashamed of what he asked. Of all of it. Her voice broke. Of being poor. Of being lost. Of needing help. Of marrying Ryan because I thought he could save me. Of staying after he hurt me. Of running only after I had nothing left. Jonathan stepped closer. Slowly. She did not back away. I'm married, she whispered. I'm pregnant. I'm hiding from a man who hurts me. I'm not that girl you remember. Jonathan looked at the scar above her eyebrow. Yes, you are, he said. She's still standing right in front of me. She's just been buried under years of fear. Emily made a sound like a sob trying to become a laugh. Then her hand rose and touched his chest. Her fingers were shaking. And for the first time since she walked back into his life, she did not look ready to run. Jonathan looked down at Emily's trembling hand on his chest. For a second, neither of them moved. The fire whispered behind them. Somewhere deep in the mansion, the heating system clicked on. The sound was small, ordinary, almost peaceful. But Emily's breath was not peaceful. It came unevenly, like every inhale had to pass through years of fear before it reached her lungs. Jonathan covered her hand with his. Slowly. Carefully. You are safe here, he said. Emily shook her head at once. You can't promise that. Yes, he said. I can. Her eyes searched his face, desperate to believe him and terrified of what belief might cost. Ryan finds things, she whispered. People, places, weak spots. He waits until you think he's gone. Then he comes back worse. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. Then he will find locked gates. Cameras. Guards. Lawyers. And me? Emily pulled her hand away and stepped back. Jonathan, don't do this because you feel guilty. He went still. She had hit the truth. Not all of it. But enough. I do feel guilty, he said. I should have found you sooner. I should have known you were here. I should have recognized you before tonight. That's not your burden. It became mine the moment I saw those bruises. Emily looked away. Her hand returned to her belly, and under the gray fabric the baby shifted. A tiny movement. A quiet life trapped inside a storm it had never asked for. Jonathan saw it. His expression changed. Not softer. Deeper. There are 23 bedrooms in this house, he said. Pick one. Emily blinked. What? Not the staff rooms. Not the 3rd floor. A real room. A safe room. Somewhere Ryan Bennett cannot reach you. I can't accept that. You're not accepting charity. That's exactly what it is? No, Jonathan said. It's protection. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Men always call it protection when they want control. The words landed hard. Jonathan took one step back. Then another. He opened his hands so she could see he was not closing in on her. You choose the room, he said. You keep the key. You decide who enters. I will not touch your life unless you ask me to. But there will be security at every entrance. No one gets onto this property without my approval. No one gets near you without yours. Emily stared at him. The anger in her face cracked first. Then the fear. Underneath both was exhaustion so complete it made her look almost weightless, like one more bad night could blow her apart. I don't know how to be safe, she whispered. Jonathan's throat tightened. Then we start simple, he said. Tonight you sleep behind a locked door. Tomorrow you wake up and no one is shouting. No one is grabbing your wrist. No one is telling you what you're worth. Her eyes filled. She did not wipe the tears away. For once she let them fall. The next morning, Emily moved into the east wing. The room sat at the end of a quiet hallway with windows on 2 walls and sunlight spilling across a white bedspread. There were fresh flowers on the dresser. A basket of baby blankets on the bed, and beside them a small stuffed rabbit with floppy ears. Emily stood in the doorway for a long time. This is too much, she said. Jonathan stood behind her, hands in his pockets. It's a room. It's a palace. It's a place to sleep. She turned slightly, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time she looked less like a woman running, and more like someone who might finally stop. For the first week, Emily Harper lived in the East Wing like someone borrowing air. She kept the room neat. Too neat. The baby blankets stayed folded. The flowers remained untouched on the dresser. Even the little stuffed rabbit sat exactly where Jonathan had placed it, as if moving anything might prove she had accepted the room as hers. She came downstairs only for meals. She ate quickly. She thanked the staff too many times. Then she disappeared behind her locked door again. Jonathan noticed everything. The way she checked the window before sitting down. The way she flinched when a door shut too hard. The way she still asked permission for things no grown woman should ever have to ask permission for. Can I use the laundry room? Can I make tea? Can I sit outside for a few minutes? Every question felt like a bruise no one could see. So Jonathan did not push. He knocked once a day. Same time. Same gentle rhythm. Need anything? And every time Emily opened the door just wide enough to answer. No. Thank you. But on the 8th morning, something changed. Jonathan was in the kitchen when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Not the quiet, careful steps she used when she wanted to be invisible. These were slower. Still uncertain. But real. Emily appeared in the doorway wearing jeans and a soft cream sweater. Her hair was down for the first time since he had found her in the hallway. It fell over her shoulders in dark waves, and for one second Jonathan saw the girl from Hawthorne Street again. Not completely, but enough to make his chest tighten. I need to do something, she said. Jonathan set down his coffee. What kind of something? She looked past him into the enormous chef's kitchen, all white marble, stainless steel, and polished copper pans hanging above the island. I used to cook, she said. Before Ryan. I liked it. Jonathan stepped aside. Then cook? Emily walked in slowly like the room might reject her. Then she opened cabinets, found pasta, tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, fresh basil from the greenhouse, and something inside her began to remember itself. Her hands stopped shaking. Her shoulders lowered. The kitchen filled with the warm smell of garlic and oil, tomatoes breaking down in a pan, basil torn between her fingers. Jonathan sat at the island and watched her. You're staring, she said without turning around. I'm observing. That sounds like staring with money. He almost smiled. Different intentions. A small smile touched her. Small, but real. She stirred the sauce and looked down into the steam. I missed this. Cooking. No. Her voice softened. Being in a kitchen that felt safe. The words settled between them. Then she said Ryan hated when I cooked. Said it wasted time. Said I should be doing something useful. Useful like what? Cleaning, laundry, things that helped him. She swallowed. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as something he could use. Jonathan's hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Emily saw it. It's okay, she said. No, he answered. It isn't. She turned, then wooden spoon in hand, belly round beneath her sweater, eyes tired but clearer than before. I know, she whispered. I'm working on believing that. Work faster. For one breath she stared at him. Then she laughed. Not the broken laugh from the library. A real laugh. Fuller. Warmer. Alive. And Jonathan felt something inside him loosen for the first time in years. That night they ate pasta at the kitchen island while rain tapped gently against the windows. Emily hummed as she wiped the counter. Jonathan washed the dishes without saying a word. For a few minutes there was no fear. No running. No Ryan Bennett. Only garlic in the air, rain on the glass, and a woman slowly remembering she was allowed to take up space. But outside the mansion gates, the darkness was not empty. That same night at 1147 Emily's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. No name. No picture. Just a number she had prayed would forget her. The room went still. Jonathan was rinsing plates at the sink when he saw her face change. The color drained from her cheeks. The soft smile from dinner vanished so quickly it felt like someone had blown out a candle. Emily, he asked. She did not answer. The phone buzzed again. Once. Twice. 3 times. She stared at it like it was a snake. Jonathan dried his hands slowly. Is it him? Her lips parted but no sound came out. The call stopped. For 2 seconds there was silence. Then the voicemail notification appeared. Emily shook her head. Don't. Jonathan did not touch the phone. He only looked at her. You decide. Her hand moved to her belly. The baby shifted beneath her sweater and Emily closed her eyes like the movement hurt. Play it, she whispered. Jonathan tapped the screen. Ryan Bennett's voice filled the kitchen. Calm? Almost gentle. And that made it worse. I know you're in there, sweetheart. I know about the billionaire. I know about the house. I know everything. Emily's breathing broke. Jonathan went completely still. Ryan continued, soft and smiling through every word. I'm going to come get you. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But soon, and when I do, there won't be anything he can do to stop me. The message ended. No one moved. Rain slid down the kitchen windows in thin silver lines. The garlic smell from dinner still hung in the air, warm and human, but now it felt wrong. Like peace had been caught doing something dangerous. Emily backed away from the counter. He found me, she said. Jonathan stepped toward her but stopped before he got too close. He found the house, not you? That's the same thing? No, Jonathan said. It isn't. Before she could answer, his security phone vibrated. One alert. Then another. Movement at the east gate. Jonathan looked down at the screen. A live camera feed appeared. A man in a leather jacket stood just beyond the property line, hands in his pockets, cigarette glowing between his fingers. His face was turned toward the camera. He was smiling. Behind him, half hidden in the shadows, stood two other men. Emily saw the screen. A small sound left her throat. Not a scream. Not a word. Just fear escaping before she could stop it. Jonathan's face changed. The warmth from dinner disappeared. The boy from Hawthorne Street was gone. In his place stood the man who had built an empire by making dangerous people regret underestimating him. He's outside, Emily whispered. Jonathan looked at the screen again. Ryan lifted one hand and gave a small wave to the camera. Not friendly. A message. I know where you are. I can wait. And I brought help. Jonathan called security. His voice was low and cold. Increase patrols around the East Wing. No one gets near her room. If he touches that gate, call the police. But call me first. He ended the call. Emily was trembling now. The baby's kicking, she said, pressing both hands to her stomach. She always does when I'm scared. Jonathan asked softly. Emily blinked through tears. I don't know. I just feel like it's a girl. For a moment, the whole world narrowed to that one fragile word. Girl. Jonathan looked from Emily's shaking hands to the dark gate on the security screen. Then he said, he will never touch either of you. Outside, Ryan Bennett kept smiling. Inside, Jonathan Reed stopped being afraid of what he might have to become. By midnight, Ryan Bennett was gone from the gate. But the fear he left behind stayed in the walls. Security doubled around the East Wing. Guards moved through the halls with quiet steps and radios clipped to their shoulders. Cameras were checked. Locks were tested. Every entrance was watched. Jonathan Reed should have felt better. He did not. Because men like Ryan did not need to break a door to enter a life. They entered through fear, through memory. Through one phone call, one smile at a gate. One reminder that peace could be stolen at any moment. Emily tried to be brave. She made tea she did not drink. She sat near the window but kept the curtains half closed. Every sound made her turn her head. Every shadow seemed to have hands. Jonathan found her in the East Wing, sitting on the edge of the bed, both palms resting on her belly. The little stuffed rabbit lay beside her untouched. He wants me scared, she whispered. Jonathan stood in the doorway. Then we don't give him what he wants. She looked up at him. I'm already scared. He stepped inside slowly. Then we make sure fear doesn't get the final word. For a moment, something softened in her face. Not peace. Not yet. But the smallest sign that she wanted to believe him. The next morning, sunlight spread across the garden like nothing terrible had happened. Emily asked to go outside. Jonathan almost said no. He wanted to. Every part of him wanted to lock every door and keep the whole world away from her. But he remembered what she had said before. Men always called it protection when they wanted control. So he swallowed the word. You won't be alone, he said. I know. She walked the garden path with one guard at a distance and Jonathan watching from his study window. Her cream sweater moved softly in the breeze. Her hair lifted around her face. She touched the petals of a white rose and for one brief second she looked almost free. Jonathan let himself breathe. 1 second too soon. At 1016 he returned to his study. There was an envelope on the floor. Slipped under the door. No stamp. No return address. No sound to explain how it got there. Jonathan stared at it. The house went silent around him. He picked it up with 2 fingers and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Emily. Taken from a distance. Standing in the garden? That morning. Jonathan's blood turned cold. He checked the timestamp printed in the corner of the photo. Minutes old. Not hours. Not yesterday. Minutes. Ryan had not just watched the house. He had crossed the line. He had gotten past the gates, past the cameras, past the guards, close enough to photograph Emily inside the one place Jonathan had promised was safe. On the back of the picture 4 words were written in black marker. You can't stop me. Jonathan's hand closed around the photograph. The paper bent, then tore slightly at the edge. He did not shout. He did not curse. He did not break anything. That was what made it worse. He walked to the window and looked down at Emily in the garden. She was smiling faintly at something the guard had said, one hand under her belly, unaware that the nightmare had already found a way inside. Jonathan reached for his phone. His voice when he spoke was quiet enough to frighten the man on the other end. Lock down the property. Now? Then he looked at the photograph again. This was not a warning anymore. It was a countdown. The lockdown had barely begun when the storm hit. Not rain. A wall of water. It slammed against the mansion windows so hard the glass seemed to breathe. Wind bent the trees in the garden. Lightning flashed over the roof, turning every hallway white for half a second, then throwing it back into darkness. Emily Harper was still in the East Wing when the first pain came. She was standing near the bed, one hand on the dresser trying to calm herself after Jonathan showed her the photograph. She had not cried. Not then. Fear had gone past tears. Then her face changed. Her fingers tightened around the wood. Jonathan saw it immediately. Emily. She took one breath. Then another. Her knees bent. Something's wrong, she whispered. He crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her before she hit the floor. A second pain came stronger. Emily cried out and grabbed his sleeve with both hands. No, not now. Jonathan's heart slammed against his ribs. He called for the doctor. No answer. He called security. Ambulance, he said. Now? The guard's voice crackled through the phone. Sir, the main road is blocked. Tree down across the gate road. Emergency services are trying another route, but the storm is slowing everything. Jonathan looked at Emily. Her hair was damp against her face. Her breathing came fast. One hand held her belly. The other still gripped him like he was the only solid thing left in the world. How long? Jonathan asked. The guard hesitated. That pause told him everything. Emily heard it too. Her eyes widened. Jonathan, she whispered, and for the first time all night, she sounded like the girl from Hawthorne Street. Scared but still fighting. I can't do this. Yes, you can. I can't. You can, he said, lowering himself beside her. And I'm right here. Another contraction tore through her. She screamed into the storm. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire East Wing went dark. For 3 seconds there was only thunder, rain, and Emily's broken breathing. Then the emergency lights came on dim and red along the baseboards. Jonathan moved fast. He sent staff for towels, warm water, blankets, anything clean. His hands were steady because they had to be. Inside he was terrified. More terrified than he had ever been in any boardroom, any fight, any threat. Because money could not help him now. Power could not help him now. Only his hands. Only his voice. Only Emily. She clutched his wrist, the same wrist where he had first seen the bruises on her. Her grip was desperate, but this time it was not fear of being hurt. It was fear of being alone. You're not alone, he said. Look at me. She did. Rain hammered the windows. Thunder shook the walls. Somewhere outside, Ryan Bennett was still out there in the dark. But inside that room everything narrowed to one woman, one child, and one impossible moment. Emily sobbed. She's coming. Jonathan swallowed hard. Then he nodded. Then we meet her. Minutes stretched like hours. Emily screamed. Prayed. Cursed. Begged. Then pushed again, harder than before, her face shining with sweat and tears. And then, it happened. A tiny cry cut through the storm. Sharp. Fragile. Alive. Jonathan froze with the newborn in his hands. For one breath even the thunder seemed to stop. Emily lifted her head, trembling. Is she okay? Jonathan wrapped the baby in a towel, his eyes wet now. She's perfect, he whispered. Then he placed the child against Emily's chest. Emily broke completely. Not from fear. From love. Outside the storm kept raging. But in that room, for the first time in years, Emily Harper held something no one could take from her. 3 days later, Ryan Bennett walked into the hospital lobby with the same cold smile Emily had feared for years. Jonathan saw him before Emily did. Ryan stood near the entrance, leather jacket zipped, 2 men behind him, his eyes fixed on the maternity floor sign. I'm here for my wife, Ryan said. Jonathan stepped in front of him. She is not your wife anymore. The divorce was finalized yesterday. Ryan's face twitched. Then Jonathan held up his phone. Restraining order violation. Assault records. Stalking reports. Hospital files. Witnesses. Every bruise you thought disappeared is still speaking. For the first time, Ryan stopped smiling. 2 police officers entered behind him. Ryan looked past Jonathan toward the elevator, toward the room where Emily held her newborn daughter. Jonathan's voice dropped. You don't get to call fear love. You don't get to call control a marriage. And you will never touch them again. Minutes later, Ryan was gone in handcuffs. Upstairs, Emily sat in bed with baby Hope asleep against her chest. When Jonathan returned, she looked at his face and knew. Is it over? She whispered. He sat beside her. It's over. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. Hope breathed softly between them. And in that quiet hospital room, the woman who once cleaned floors in fear finally became free. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have been silent the longest. Never mistake someone's fear for weakness. And never forget, one safe hand, one brave choice, one person who refuses to look away can change an entire life. If this story touched your heart, comment hope below. Subscribe to the channel because the next story may remind someone that they are not alone.